She raised her hand. He lowered his eyes. The crack of her palm against my cheek cut through the clink of silverware and the faint hiss of the roast cooling on the table. For a moment, even the clock on the wall seemed to stop. I could taste the copper of shame before I realized it was my own blood from where her ring had split my lip. My son, my only child, stared at his plate, jaw tight but unmoving, as if my humiliation were just another course to be served. That was the night I decided he would inherit nothing from me but the memory of his silence. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The fork was halfway to my mouth when Jade wrinkled her nose. Is this store-bought pasta sauce? She asked, her tone sugared with false surprise. I didn't answer. The steam from the plate curled between us like a fragile truce. Marcus glanced at his phone. His thumb scrolled. The dining room smelled of garlic and basil, but the taste in my mouth had gone metallic. I pushed the food around, letting the sauce smear into the porcelain. Well, Jade said, spearing a piece of chicken, it's edible. Carolyn once told me the law isn't always about what's said, it's about what's left unsaid. Tonight, Marcus said nothing. I placed my fork gently on the plate. Excuse me a moment, I murmured, stacking my silverware together as if I was tidying the tension itself. Jade smirked. Oh, don't be dramatic, Elaine. We're just talking. I was halfway to the kitchen when her voice sharpened. Why are you still in this house anyway? It's been 10 years since... The sentence cut in two when her palm met my face. A sharp crack, louder than it should have been, filled the room. The sting bloomed across my cheek, heat radiating toward my ear. My body went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Marcus's chair creaked. I turned toward him, expecting something. His hands stayed folded in his lap. His eyes dropped to the table. Let's all calm down, he said, as though I'd started a storm. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and betrayal. I took one step back. My fingers tightened around the back of the dining chair, not for balance, but to keep from speaking. I nodded once, a small, deliberate motion. Then I walked to the hallway, my heels clicking against the hardwood like a closing argument. In the front closet, I reached for my bag, the leather worn smooth by years of errands, hospital visits, and birthday surprises. It felt heavier than it had that morning. Neither of them followed me to the door. Outside, the night air was damp, a soft drizzle cooling the burn on my cheek. I didn't hurry to my car. The driveway's stones crunched under each step, the sound steady, like counting. At home, I hung my coat, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in the living room without turning on a light. The house was quiet in the way only an old, lived-in home could be, walls holding a lifetime of conversations. My hand drifted to the bookshelf, sliding across spines of cookbooks and old photo albums until it reached the black leather binder. The binder that had lived there since Marcus was a teenager, full of signatures, notarizations, and numbers. I set it on the table, its weight a reminder. Everything in this house, everything in my accounts, had once been meant for him. The rain outside turned heavier, tapping against the windows like a waiting jury. I flipped to the first page, Last Will and Testament of Elaine Murray. The ink was clean, unblemished. I traced the letters of his name. Then I carried it to the shredder. The whir started low, then rose to a steady grind as the first page disappeared into strips. I didn't blink. One by one, the rest followed. Pages that had taken years to accumulate, shredded in minutes. When the last corner vanished, I emptied the bin into a trash bag and tied it tight. I pressed my palm, still faintly warm from her slap, against the kitchen counter. That's the last time, I said aloud, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. The house seemed to breathe with me, like it understood. That night, as I set the empty binder back on the shelf, I thought of Jade's smirk, Marcus's downcast eyes, and the sting that hadn't yet faded. I walked into my study, poured a small glass of Merlot, and sat down with a notepad. Tomorrow, I'd call Carolyn. Tonight, I slid the now worthless binder into the shredder, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to inherit but silence. The next morning, Richmond was still wet from the night's rain, the sidewalks slick and dark as ink. I parked outside Carolyn Holt's office, the same narrow brick building where we'd fought estate battles for clients 3 decades ago. Back then, I'd been the paralegal everyone underestimated. Carolyn had been the attorney who taught me that silence could be a weapon if you sharpened it enough. She opened the door before I could knock. Her hair, now streaked with silver, was swept back in a practical knot. The scent of fresh coffee curled into the air between us. "Just tell me what she did," she said, her voice low and deliberate. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't soften it. "She slapped me," I said. He watched. Carolyn's jaw flexed once, the way it always did before she made a decision. She didn't ask for context or excuses. She simply moved behind her desk, sat, and opened a blank estate template on her laptop. "You want this airtight?" she asked. "As the grave," I said. The click of her keyboard filled the room, steady and precise. I watched as she typed my name, then erased Marcus's with the same mechanical calm you'd use to cross out a grocery item. Jade's name never appeared. "Executor?" Carolyn asked without looking up. "You," I said. "No one else." She nodded. "Beneficiaries?" I handed her a list I'd written in clean block letters the night before. Scholarship Fund, Richmond Women's Shelter, St. Catherine's Legal Aid. "That's 85%, she murmured, scanning. "The rest?" "Keep enough liquid for maintenance. I don't want them even contesting over property upkeep." She leaned back, studying me. "No house transfer?" "Living trust," I said. "They don't get keys. Not now. Not after." The printer hummed, warm paper sliding into the tray. I could smell the faint tang of toner, the scent oddly final. Carolyn slid the draft toward me. "This," she said, "is enforceable even under challenge. They can't touch it unless they can prove you weren't of sound mind." I smiled without humor. "Sounder than I've ever been." We went line by line. Each clause felt like a stitch, sewing up something raw and exposed inside me. The legal language was cool, detached. Exactly what I wanted. No poetry, no sentiment. Just iron. By the time the notary arrived, my signature flowed without hesitation. Pen scratches over paper, initials in the margins, each one closing a door. Carolyn sealed the signed original in a heavy manila envelope. "I'll keep this in the office vault," she said. "You can take a certified duplicate." I held the duplicate in my hands, the embossed seal catching the morning light. It felt heavier than it should, not from the paper, but from the decision it carried. Carolyn studied me a moment longer. "We can still leave him something," she said finally, almost gently. I set the envelope flat on the desk, smoothed the crease with my palm, and met her eyes. "Leave him the silence." She nodded once, and the room felt colder, sharper, like we'd just finished loading the last bullet into a chamber. As I stepped out into the drizzle, the envelope under my arm, I didn't look back at the office. The city smelled of wet asphalt and camellias, the air cool on my cheek where her hand had landed. I unlocked my car, slid the envelope into the passenger seat, and thought, this is the day they stopped being my family. And somewhere inside Carolyn's vault, my will waited like a trap they wouldn't see until it was far too late. The pen's tip pressed into the final signature line, my hand steady, the black ink gliding without a pause. The notary's stamp came next. A sharp, deliberate thud against the paper. It was the sound of a door locking from the inside. Carolyn slid the signed will into a thick envelope and sealed it with a strip of tamper-proof tape. "Original stays in my office vault," she said, her tone as matter-of-fact as if we were boxing up tax returns. "I'll take the certified copy," I told her. She handed me the duplicate, the embossed seal catching the fluorescent light. It was warm from her hands, but its weight felt cold, like the barrel of a gun resting on the table between us. Back home, I didn't leave the envelope in plain sight. I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom, the one Marcus had once used as a pirate's treasure chest when he was 8, and placed it under a folded quilt my mother made. I closed the lid slowly, the hinges sighing like they knew the shift that had just taken place. By late afternoon, I was on the phone with the county clerk's office, filing paperwork to transfer my house into a living trust. "The title will be in your name as trustee," the clerk explained, "but no one inherits it directly. Upon your passing, it transfers per the trust's terms. Perfect. They could haunt this place all they wanted. They'd never own it." The next 2 days, I worked in silence, replacing the deadbolt with a high-grade lock that clicked shut with satisfying finality. In the foyer, I mounted 2 small, discreet cameras, one aimed at the front door, the other down the hallway toward the living room. Another camera went in the kitchen, its tiny red light pulsing every few seconds like a heartbeat. Every turn of the screwdriver felt like I was tightening a lid they'd never pry open. On Thursday afternoon, a knock at the door broke the quiet. When I opened it, Jade stood there holding 2 grocery bags. The smell of ripe bananas and detergent floated up from the thin plastic. She smiled in that way people do when they're performing for an audience, only there wasn't one. "Brought you some things," she said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite her. Her eyes flicked around the foyer, lingering on the new lock. "Still here?" she asked, tilting her head. I didn't answer. I took the bags from her and carried them to the counter. As I set them down, the camera above the cabinets blinked once. Red. Recording. Jade lingered in the doorway, tapping her fingers against the frame. "We should all have dinner soon," she said lightly. "Clear the air." I looked past her to the door. She followed my gaze, shrugged, and left. The sound of her car pulling away was like a knot loosening in my chest. That evening, I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The sealed envelope with the will was upstairs, the trust paperwork waiting to be filed, the cameras already uploading to a secure drive Carolyn could access. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to exhale slowly. Everything was in place, not for them to take, but for me to protect. Later that night, my laptop chimed with a new email. From me, Marcus Murray. Subject: "This weekend? Want to talk this weekend?" it read. And then, as if he couldn't help himself, the final line: "Jade says you're still upset." I closed the laptop, the kitchen light glinting off the camera's lens. If they thought I was upset, they were wrong. I was building something far more permanent. The email sat in my inbox all Friday night like a loose tooth. Irritating, unignorable, tempting to touch. By morning, I had my answer, though I didn't bother to type it. I spent Saturday in the attic, pulling down cardboard boxes that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, photographs in brittle albums, Christmas ornaments wrapped in yellowing tissue, a shoebox of birthday cards written in my son's scrawled handwriting from when he still called me Mommy. I spread everything across the living room floor, the afternoon light pooling gold over the mess. I went pile by pile, keeping only the things that came from my parents: my mother's enamel brooch, my father's leather-bound Bible, a wedding portrait taken in black and white long before Marcus was born. Everything else, every memento of the life I'd built for my son, went into donation boxes, the albums, the ornaments, The hand-knit sweater he'd worn his first Christmas, now too fragile to survive another season. I didn't shred them. I didn't burn them. I gave them away, letting strangers decide what was worth keeping. By Sunday morning, the house echoed differently, lighter but not empty. At the kitchen table, I opened a fresh legal pad and wrote a title in steady block letters, "To myself, in case I ever apologize." The words that followed weren't for Marcus. They weren't for Jade. They were a breadcrumb trail for the woman I might become if I ever doubted myself again. I wrote about the slap, about the silence, about the way Marcus's eyes slid away instead of toward me. I wrote about how easy it had been for them to expect my forgiveness without asking for it. By the time I stopped, 3 pages in, my handwriting had slanted sharper, almost like a warning sign. That afternoon, Carolyn knocked. No appointment, just an unspoken understanding that she could come by. She brought a stack of crisp forms in a leather portfolio. "Beneficiary updates," she said. We sat at the dining table, sunlight falling in stripes through the blinds. I initialed page after page, transferring what remained of my estate into the trust. Scholarships, shelters, legal aid. Carolyn watched me sign, her pen tapping softly against the wood. When we finished, I slid the last paper back to her. "My name," I said, "is not a gift bag." She smiled faintly, "And now it's written down." Later, as I was stacking the donation boxes near the door for Monday pickup, my phone buzzed. A notification from Jade's public social media account, a photo of her standing in front of my garden, my red camellias in full bloom behind her. She was smiling wide, her chin tilted in that mock-innocent way. The caption read, "Still here. Family, drama-free." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I didn't comment. I didn't even like the post. I simply took a screenshot and sent it to Carolyn with 4 words typed beneath. "Prepare non-contest clause. Some wars you fight in court. Some you fight with the quiet click of a camera." Marcus's voice was stiff over the phone, like every word had been ironed flat before he said it. "I just think we should smooth things over, Mom. Clear the air." I let the pause hang long enough for him to feel it. "Fine," I said at last. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Broad." The next morning, I walked into the warm rush of espresso steam and baked cinnamon. The place was half full, humming with quiet conversations and the occasional hiss of the milk frother. Marcus was already at the corner table, a paper cup between his hands, and next to him, Jade. Uninvited, unsurprising, sitting with her coat draped across the back of the chair like she was claiming territory. "Mom," Marcus said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I slid into the seat opposite, setting my leather folio down beside me. Jade's gaze dropped to it for a second before she smoothed her hair and sat straighter. Marcus opened with a clumsy sigh. She didn't mean it. His fingers drummed against the coffee cup, the paper giving a faint crinkle. "She meant it," I replied, meeting his eyes. He faltered, glancing at Jade. She leaned forward, her voice honeyed but with a metallic edge. "You know you'll leave the house to your only child, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement wearing a smile. I let the silence breathe between us. The hum of the coffee shop filled it. Spoons clinking against mugs, chairs scraping the wood floor. Finally, I smiled. "I've left something." Jade's mouth curved. "Good." "A line," I said evenly. "You've crossed it." Her smile cracked. Just slightly, like paint under heat. I reached into the folio and pulled out a single sheet of crisp ivory paper. The heading was clear and sharp. Non-contest clause, formal notice of disinheritance. I slid it across the table. Marcus hesitated before touching it. Jade didn't. She leaned over, scanning quickly, the pink in her cheeks deepening to red. "You can't be serious," she said. I'm meticulous, I corrected. This is legal. This is final. Marcus looked from me to the document, searching for some softened corner that didn't exist. Mom, why? I held his gaze. Because you watched. The weight of those words seemed to land heavier than the paper between us. Jade scoffed, sitting back. You'll regret this. I don't regret locking my doors, I said, standing. And this is just another lock. Marcus's lips parted like he might speak, but the words never came. I slid the folio back into my bag, leaving the paper exactly where it sat, dead center between them like a loaded trap. You asked to smooth things over, I said, stepping away. Consider it done. As the bell over the door jingled behind me, I didn't have to turn around to know they were still staring at the paper. They'd walked in certain they could cash in on a lifetime of assumption. Now, they were holding proof it had all been overdrafted. The knife slid cleanly through the roasted chicken breast, the skin crackling under the pressure. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of rosemary and lemon into the stillness of the kitchen. There was no chatter from the dining room tonight, no scraping of extra chairs against the hardwood. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sigh of the house settling into its bones. I set one plate in the center of the table, my place, and poured a glass of Merlot, the kind Marcus always said was too dry, and Jade called pretentious. The candlelight flickered over the rim, throwing tiny reflections on the polished wood. Before I took a bite, I opened the folded letter propped against the salt shaker. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was as steady as the man who wrote it. If they ever forget who raised them, remember who you are. I read it twice, then slid it back into its envelope. It had been years since Robert's voice lived anywhere outside my memory, but tonight, he was here, between the lines, in the weight of the words, in the quiet that didn't feel empty. Halfway through my meal, the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw a woman holding a Tupperware container and a smile. Warm, cautious, the way neighbors are when they're still learning each other's names. I'm Susan, she said when I opened the door. We just moved in down the street. Thought we'd say hello. The cookies were still warm when she handed them over. Chocolate chip. The sugar and butter scent wrapped around me like a small kindness. We stood there for 10 minutes, talking about the weather, the crepe myrtle trees, the best grocery store in town. I didn't tell her anything about Marcus or Jade. Not tonight. When she left, I returned to the table, the plate still waiting. The candle burned lower. I took another sip of wine, letting it roll slow and dry across my tongue. After dinner, I went to my desk and pulled out the file marked Personal Requests. The first line under funeral service had read, Family remarks optional. I crossed it out and wrote, in a steady hand, No family speeches. Carolyn called just after 9. Charity structures finalized, she said. I could hear her smile in the way her voice lifted. Good, I told her. Let's get it filed before the week's out. She asked if I wanted to meet for lunch, but I told her I had something else to finish. That something was a check. $50,000, written in dark blue ink and made out to the Richmond Women's Shelter. In the memo line I wrote, In honor of women who raise themselves twice. I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and set it on the counter with tomorrow's mail. By 10, the dishes were washed, the candles blown out. I moved through the house barefoot, each step on the cool wood floor reminding me that my home was mine again, not just in deed, but in spirit. The answering machine light blinked red when I passed the hallway table. I pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the air, sharper now, threaded with frustration. You're ruining everything. For what? I let the machine click off, the silence swallowing his question whole. In the kitchen, the cookies sat under their plastic lid, the faint sweetness cutting through the lingering scent of rosemary. I broke one in half, took a bite, and decided I didn't owe him an answer. Not tonight. Not ever. The wine glass was still half full. I lifted it to my lips, and the quiet tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. The elevator doors opened to a rush of warm air, faintly scented with grilled salmon and rosemary butter. The rooftop bistro was lit in gold, strings of bulbs looping above the tables, their glow softening the edges of the night. Richmond's skyline shimmered in the distance, glass and steel against a navy sky. Carolyn was already there, her posture straight, her smile patient, a glass of sparkling water sweating on the table in front of her. She stood when she saw me. No judgment in her eyes, no pity, just recognition. "You're calmer," she said after we hugged. I sat down, smoothed the napkin across my lap, and looked at her with the smallest smile I'd felt in weeks. "I'm lighter." The waiter came and went with menus. We didn't rush. Carolyn sipped her water. I watched the candles dance in their glass cylinders. The noise here wasn't intrusive. Just the low hum of conversation, the clink of cutlery, the occasional burst of laughter from another table. "Legacy," Carolyn began, cutting into the quiet like she was picking up a conversation we'd been having for years. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" I nodded. "It's not just what's left. It's how it's left. And to whom." We talked about aging, about memory, about the parts of ourselves that survive when people choose to forget the rest. I told her about the letter from Robert I'd read over dinner last night, about how it had reminded me who I was before I let Marcus and Jade shrink me down to an inconvenient presence. When the main courses arrived, hers a roasted duck, mine a seared sea bass, she reached into her bag and slid a small black lockbox across the table. The metal was cool, matte, with a brass clasp. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," she said, her tone somewhere between businesslike and tender. I opened it. Inside, cushioned by velvet, was a safe copy of my will. On the underside of the lid, an engraving. Still standing. For a moment my throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling each groove like a reminder carved in stone. Later, back at home, I placed the lockbox in the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out stationery. Not for Marcus, not for Jade, for strangers. I began writing short, anonymous notes. No return address, just words. "You're stronger than you think. The hand that hurt you doesn't define you. It's not just the leaving. It's who stands with you when you do." I mailed them to women's shelters across the state. No signature, no expectation. 2 weeks later, I opened a newsletter from the Richmond Women's Shelter. My photo was there, the one from last year's charity event, taken before things with Marcus and Jade had curdled. The caption read, "She left more than money." It wasn't about the size of the check I'd sent them. It was about the fact that I had chosen them over blood. The phone rang that evening. My machine picked up before I could reach it, and the voice that came through was cold, familiar, and dripping with contempt. "You're going to regret this," Jade said. "He cried all night." I didn't delete the message. I played it again. Once, then again. Each time, the same 7 words felt less like a threat and more like an admission. Outside, the street lamps clicked on one by one, and the shadows along my driveway stretched long and thin. If Marcus cried, it wasn't for me. And if Jade thought that would break me, she hadn't yet realized. I was the one holding the blueprint now. The voicemail sat in my inbox like a bruise you can't stop pressing. 7 seconds long. Marcus's voice, cracked and uneven. "You're going to regret this. He cried all night." I played it once, the sound filling my kitchen like stale air. Once was enough. I pressed delete. The machine's soft beep felt cleaner than any apology I'd ever get from him. I pulled a sheet of lined paper from my desk drawer and wrote one sentence, slow and deliberate. He didn't cry when I was slapped. The ink bled slightly into the fibers, permanent enough for me to see it again if I ever started doubting myself. I folded the page and slid it into the same envelope that held my funeral requests. A reminder. Not for them. For me. That afternoon, Carolyn came over with her leather briefcase, the one that always looked too heavy for her frame. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Let's at it," she said. We sat at my dining table, the wood cool under my forearms, drafting a non-reconciliation clause into my trust. In plain English, it meant that if Marcus or Jade tried to make nice for the sake of getting back in my will, the legal wall would stand. No loopholes, no charming their way back in. Carolyn slid the fresh pages toward me. I initialed every margin, the sound of my pen scratching like a signature on freedom itself. Later, while watering my azaleas, I got the notification. Jade had posted a photo, her in oversized sunglasses, holding a wine glass up to the camera. The caption read, "You can't teach dignity to the dead weight." The likes and laughing emojis piled up beneath it. I didn't flinch. Instead, I screenshotted the post, the sunlight on my garden pooling over my hands as I saved the image into my legal folder. Inside that folder, I opened a yellow sticky note and wrote, "They think I'm petty. I call it documented." I stuck it to the screenshot printout. Evidence doesn't need anger. It just needs a date and time. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, the smell of honey curling up from the mug. Across the street, a couple walked their dog. I watched them laugh at something only they could hear. The phone rang. Carolyn's name lit up the screen. Her voice was steady, but the words dropped like stones. "Jade's trying to challenge the trust." I didn't stand up. I didn't pace. I just sipped my tea and let the warmth slide down my throat. If Jade wanted a fight, I had been preparing for one since the moment her hand connected with my cheek. And unlike Marcus, I wasn't going to stand by and watch. The moment Carolyn's voice sharpened on the phone, I knew Jade had finally decided to stop throwing shade online and start throwing paperwork in court. "She's claiming undue influence," Carolyn said, "that you weren't of sound mind when you rewrote your will." I laughed. It was short, humorless. Sound mind? I've never thought clearer in my life. By the next morning, Carolyn's office was already humming. She'd pulled my trust documents into a neat, intimidating stack, all tabs and color-coded highlights. "We're not just responding," she said, sliding a fresh set of papers across her desk. "We're filing a preemptive motion to block any contest before it begins. It's cleaner this way." Cuts her off at the knees. Her phrasing made me smile. Jade had always been so careful about appearances. She'd hate the image. When the clerk's stamp hit the motion, the sound was final. But paperwork wasn't enough. "Do you still have it?" Carolyn asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. The plastic felt warm from being in my pocket, like it knew it carried the truth. Security camera footage from the night of the slap, time-stamped. Audio clear enough to hear Marcus's voice telling everyone to calm down while my cheek still burned. We didn't stop there. Carolyn sent her paralegal to speak with Mrs. Halverson, my neighbor, the one who'd been trimming her hydrangeas when Jade stormed off my porch that afternoon. She'd seen enough to write a formal witness statement. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. Sometimes the plain truth is the sharpest blade. When Jade's lawyer reviewed our packet, the will, the trust, the footage, the witness statement, the air went out of her case like a punctured balloon. The withdrawal notice came through 3 days later. No apology, no acknowledgement, just retreat. I thought that might be the end. It wasn't. Marcus's letter arrived in my mailbox the next morning. The handwriting was still the same boyish scrawl he'd used on his middle school thank you notes. I didn't know what to do, he wrote. That was it. No regret, no anger at Jade, just a limp defense of his own inaction. I read it once, folded it back into the envelope, and called him. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Then don't expect a reward for doing nothing. The silence on the line told me he heard me. Whether he understood me, that was another matter entirely. That night, I sat in my living room, the hum of the refrigerator steady in the background, and opened my laptop. A notification from social media blinked in the corner of the screen. Against my better judgment, I clicked. Marcus had posted a photo, just a black and white shot of a road disappearing into the horizon. His caption read, "Some things are unforgivable." The comments were already piling up, some offering sympathy, others demanding to know what had happened, a few brave ones asking outright if this was about me. I closed the laptop without replying. Public sympathy is a strange thing. It rolls downhill toward whoever can stand still the longest. And if Jade thought the court's decision was my only weapon, she had no idea how long I could stand. The email subject line was simple. Your story helped someone leave. It came from the director of a local domestic violence center. I read it twice before opening it, my hand hesitating on the mouse as if the words might burn. Inside, the message was short. One of their residents had read a news post about the trust case, about the slap, the silence, and my decision to cut my son and his wife out of my will. That resident had walked out of a 17-year marriage the next day. It wasn't gratitude they were sending me. It was proof. The center invited me to an anonymous survivor's night. I didn't RSVP. I just showed up. The room smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon candles. The walls were covered in squares of paper where women had written short, sharp messages. Little fragments of their escape. Some were angry. Some were raw. Some were simply tired. I didn't speak. I sat in the corner with my coat still on, listening to stories that bled into each other. Different names, same patterns. When the facilitator passed me a pen and a blank square, I thought for a moment before writing, it's not just the hand, it's who doesn't stop it. I pressed the pen harder than I meant to, the letters cutting slightly into the paper. They pinned it to the wall without asking for my name. 2 days later, someone from the shelter posted a photo of that wall. My words were visible, but only as part of a sea of others. No names, no faces, just truth. And somehow, that was enough for people to find me. The post didn't explode. It didn't need to. It moved like quiet water, passed between private group chats and shared in stories without tags, the kind of thing women send each other at midnight. Jade noticed. She tried to mock it online. Imagine thinking one little slap makes you a hero. Drama queen. But the internet for once didn't indulge her. The replies stacked up fast. Some called her out directly. Others simply posted the wall photo under her comment. No one had to name me for her shame to be obvious. It was the first time I'd seen her lose control of the narrative. Then the letters started coming. Not emails. Actual letters, written in shaky cursive or bold marker, sometimes on lined notebook paper, sometimes on the back of receipts. One woman wrote, "Your story reminded me that my daughter is watching. I left last week." Another, "He never hit me, but he kept me small. You reminded me I could get bigger." I stacked them in a shoebox, no order, no labels. Just a quiet pile of lives that had shifted course. When Carolyn stopped by one Thursday, she noticed the box on my dining table. She lifted the lid, skimmed a few pages, and didn't speak for a full minute. "You realize," she said finally, "this is bigger than you and them now." I shrugged, but I knew she was right. This was no longer just about a slap or a will. It was about the shape of silence and who it protects. The next morning, Carolyn came back with a thick envelope. She set it on my kitchen counter without ceremony. "A publisher's interested," she said. "Memoir proposal. They want you to tell it all." The envelope felt heavier than paper should. The pen was heavier than I remembered. Not physically, just in meaning. It sat between my fingers like a loaded weapon, the kind that didn't fire bullets but erased names. Across the table, Carolyn slid the first document toward me. "Start here," she said, her voice as steady as the mahogany desk between us. I signed over the vineyard land first. 50 acres of rolling Virginia soil that had been in my late husband's family for nearly a century. Gone, in a legal instant, to the Shelter Foundation. They would grow grapes still, maybe. Or maybe something entirely different. But whatever bloomed there now, it would never be watered by entitlement. Next came the house. My house. The one Marcus had played in as a boy, where Jade had once pretended to help me in the kitchen before she decided her time was better spent criticizing the decor. Upon my death, it would pass not to my son, but to the director of the shelter. Not to own personally, but to use as transitional housing for women rebuilding their lives. A home that had once been a prison of family tension would become someone else's escape route. Carolyn handed me a single-page letter, typed neatly in 12-point font. Beneficiary, Marcus Murray. There was only one sentence beneath his name. "This is the cost of watching." No explanation, no room for debate, just cause and effect, distilled into 7 words. I initialed the corner without hesitation. From there, the papers moved like a slow river between us. Living trust amendments, property transfer deeds, the scholarship agreement. I read each one, not because I doubted them, but because every signature was a small act of reclamation. The scholarship would be annual, perpetual, and bear my mother's name. It would fund paralegal training for women who had been victims of domestic abuse, giving them the same legal literacy that had saved me. A full circle, written in ink. Carolyn watched me sign the last page. "You sure?" she asked, her pen poised over the witness line. "I've never been surer," I said, sliding the document toward her. "I used to think legacy meant leaving something for family. Now I know it means leaving something that matters." She smiled faintly. "Then you've done it." By the time we were finished, the air in her office felt different, lighter, as if a storm had passed through and cleared the humidity. We didn't toast. We didn't celebrate. We simply stacked the documents, clipped them together, and set them in her fireproof safe. I carried only one thing with me when I left, a plain envelope. That night, I sat at my kitchen table under the warm glow of the overhead light. The envelope lay in front of me, blank except for Marcus's name typed neatly in the center. No return address. Inside, I placed a single photocopy, the disinheritance clause bearing his name and my 7-word message. Not an accusation, not a plea, just truth on paper. I sealed it, ran my thumb along the flap until it stuck, and laid it beside the stack of outgoing mail. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Outside, the crickets were loud, but somehow even they sounded like they were keeping their distance. In the morning, I walked it to the blue mailbox at the end of my street. The metal clanged shut, swallowing the envelope whole. No one passing by would know that inside was the cleanest break I'd ever made. 3 days later, as I returned from the grocery store, I saw him. Marcus's office building downtown. And there he was in the glass lobby, holding the envelope, staring at it like it might explode in his hands. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. Because the next time we spoke, it wouldn't be in person. It would be in the pages of what I'd left behind. Marcus slid open the envelope like it might contain a truce. His hands trembled. Not from age, like mine sometimes do, but from anticipation. I imagined he thought he'd find a note, maybe a line about family or starting fresh. Instead, A single sheet slid out, followed by a photograph. The paper was crisp, legal weight, official. Across the top, beneficiary, Marcus Murray. Beneath, one cold, unblinking sentence. This is the cost of watching. His eyes scanned it twice, confusion flickering before recognition landed like a brick in his chest. Then he turned the photograph over. The image was stark. Me, weeks ago, in the hours after Jade's slap. The faint bruise just beginning to bloom along my cheekbone, shadowed by kitchen light. I'd let Carolyn take that photo the night it happened, not for sentiment, but for evidence. The camera had caught more than the bruise. It had caught my eyes. Steady, tired, done. On the back, in black ink, I'd written, "Frame this, if you ever wonder why." He sat down hard on the break room chair. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air, and a half-empty carton of powdered creamer sat crooked on the counter. A colleague from accounting walked in, took one look at him, and froze. "You okay?" she asked, not moving closer. Marcus's voice cracked before he could stop it. "No." The woman hesitated, glanced at the paper in his hands, and stepped out without another word. Even strangers, it seemed, knew when a wound was too raw to touch. While he sat surrounded by fluorescent light and the hum of the vending machine, I was in my garden. The soil was cool beneath my gloves, and the morning sun warmed the back of my neck. I knelt by the west fence, where the earth had been turned just enough for new roots. Lilies, my mother's favorite. She used to say they were flowers that knew how to hold their own. They didn't wilt at the first hint of frost. They bided their time, came back stronger in spring. Carolyn arrived through the side gate, the scent of fresh mulch trailing with her. She crouched beside me, careful not to step on the new bulbs. "They'll be up by May," I said, patting the soil flat. She smiled. "By then, I'll probably have a dozen more women quoting you in my inbox." I brushed the dirt from my hands. "Quoting me?" "Your story's changing people," she said. "The shelter board says they've had 2 women walk in this week because they saw what you did. They said you made them believe it was possible to walk away and still win." The praise didn't swell my chest. It settled there, warm and solid, like the weight of the lilies in the ground, a quiet reminder that growth doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like planting something you'll never see bloom. That night, I poured myself tea and sat at the kitchen table, the steam curling toward the low light. My phone buzzed. It was a screenshot from a friend who still followed Jade online, a social media story, her face twisted in rage, words stamped across it in thick white font. "I'll make sure that woman dies alone." I stared at it for a long moment. The tea went cold. If Jade thought isolation was my greatest fear, she'd misunderstood me entirely. The phone rang just after sunrise, its shrill tone slicing through the stillness of the kitchen. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked it up anyway. Jade's voice came through sharp and thin, like she'd been rehearsing and finally decided to perform. "Marcus is spiraling," she said. "He's not sleeping. He's not eating. We need to talk." I stirred honey into my tea, slow and unhurried. "We don't," I replied. Her breath caught. "Elaine, you can't just—" "I can," I said and hung up. By noon, Carolyn had already intercepted 2 more attempts. One call from Marcus, another from a blocked number I knew was Jade. Carolyn's voice was almost smug when she updated me. "Consider me your call firewall," she said. "They won't get through." I smiled, more grateful than I could put into words. There was relief in not having to listen to them anymore. No apologies too shallow to matter, no bargaining disguised as concern. Just silence. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and began drafting my obituary. I'd handled hundreds for clients in my paralegal years, but I'd never thought about my own. 1 page, clean, sparse. Elaine Margaret Murray, 71, passed peacefully in her Richmond home. She is remembered for her dedication to legal advocacy, community service, and her belief that strength can be quiet. No surviving relatives listed. No photographs of me in group shots I no longer wish to remember. No space for them to claim. It wasn't pettiness. It was precision. While I typed, an email pinged from the shelter's director. They were planning a legacy dinner in my honor, she wrote. A gathering not for mourning, but for gratitude. Laughter, wine, stories. No black dresses unless someone wanted to wear one. I agreed without hesitation. The idea of a room full of people who knew the truth, and stood anyway, was the kind of send-off most people never got to witness while alive. That same week, a donation came through under a name I didn't recognize at first, C. Holt, Carolyn. It was large enough to cover a year's housing for one of the women in their program. The note in the message to recipient field read, "In honor of the woman who taught me to fight in heels." Later, I learned the funds had gone to help a woman who had escaped a 17-year marriage marked by bruises she'd hidden and words she'd swallowed. My quiet war had bought her a ticket out. 2 days later, a local journalist called. She'd heard whispers from the shelter about my case. The slap, the disinheritance, the way I'd turned a family betrayal into a legal firewall. "It's unusual," she said delicately, "to see someone follow through like you did. We'd like to feature you." I told her I wasn't interested in drama, and she promised it would be a human interest story, not tabloid fodder. Carolyn leaned across my kitchen island later and said, "Let them write it. This isn't just your fight anymore." I agreed. Not because I wanted the attention, but because I knew stories had a way of traveling to the ears that needed them most. The interview was quiet, factual. I didn't embellish. I didn't raise my voice. I just told her what happened. The dinner, the slap, the eyes that looked away, the papers I signed after. When she asked how it felt to leave nothing to my son, I said, "I left him everything he earned." The article ran on a Thursday. I found the paper rolled neatly on my porch, bound by a thin rubber band. Across the front page of the local section, my photograph, the one they'd taken in my garden, hands in the soil, stared back at me. The headline was as sharp as any legal clause I'd ever drafted. "She left nothing to the people who left her." I stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in my hand, knowing there was no going back. The ballroom glowed with amber light, the kind that softened edges and made even strangers look familiar. Round tables bloomed with white lilies and tapered candles, their flames dancing in time with the low hum of conversation. I'd been to my share of banquets over the years, most of them stiff, predictable affairs where people read from index cards and clapped politely when it was over. This was different. This one was alive. The shelter's director clasped my hands the moment I arrived. "It's not just a dinner, Elaine," she whispered, her eyes bright. "It's a thank you." I took my seat at the head table, but I didn't feel like the head of anything. Around me were women who had rebuilt themselves from rubble, staff who had worked 20-hour days to keep others safe, and donors who gave without needing their names printed in gold. Someone clinked a glass, and the chatter fell to a warm hush. The director stood. "We're here tonight because of what one person decided, that her story didn't have to end quietly, that she could turn something cruel into something that would shelter others. Elaine Murray, would you come up?" The applause was soft at first, then swelled. I walked to the microphone, steady on my feet, though my heart thrummed like a low drum. I unfolded the paper in my hands. I'd written the letter the night before, knowing I couldn't trust myself to improvise. "This is what a name can build," I began, my voice clear, "and what it must protect. A name isn't just ink on paper or something whispered at the end of a wedding aisle. It's a promise. And I've learned, sometimes painfully, that not everyone who carries your name will honor it, but you can still make sure it stands for something. I saw nods in the crowd. A few people dabbed their eyes. I am here, I continued, because when someone took a hand to me, someone else looked away. And I decided, no one will look away from my legacy. When I stepped back from the microphone, the applause was louder, warmer. At my table, a young woman with cropped hair and a navy blazer leaned toward me. "Your story kept me going," she said. "I read it in the paper. I was deciding whether to leave. I left that night." Her words sank into me like heat into cold fingers. Carolyn, ever the composed one, waited until dessert before raising her glass. "To silence that became steel," she said. "And to a woman who taught us that the law can be both shield and sword." The room stood with her, glasses lifted. I breathed in, and for the first time in years, there was no weight on my chest. Just air. Later, back home, I stepped out of my heels and padded barefoot into my study. I opened the fireproof box tucked under my desk and placed inside the last copy of my will. It sat atop old photographs I'd chosen to keep. My mother's pendant, and a letter from Carolyn in her tidy, precise handwriting. For when you need to remember why. The lid shut with a solid click. I'd just turned off the study light when a knock echoed through the quiet. Not a hesitant tap. 3 firm raps, like someone expecting to be let in. I opened the front door to find Marcus standing alone on the porch. No Jade. Just my son, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed, and a look on his face that told me whatever he was here for, it wasn't small. Marcus didn't step inside right away. He stood on the porch like a man rehearsing his lines, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. The porch light caught the silver beginning to thread through his hair. "She's gone," he said finally. His voice was flat, as if the words were stones dropping in still water. I messed up. I leaned against the doorframe, the night air sharp against my skin. "Gone where?" "Left. Packed a bag and I don't even know. No note." His throat bobbed. "I don't think she's coming back." Inside, I gestured toward the sofa. He sat, hunched forward, elbows on knees, a posture I'd seen when he was 8 and had come home with a failing grade. The difference was then I'd reached for him. Now, I didn't move. "I can't undo your silence," I said evenly, "but I can protect others from it." He looked up, startled by my choice of words. "I wasn't thinking." "No," I cut in. "That's exactly the problem. You weren't thinking. You were watching." The clock ticked loud in the quiet between us. He ran a hand over his face like he could wipe away the years between that night and now. "Is there anything left for me?" he asked. His tone was half pleading, half resigned, like a man asking the doctor if there's still a cure when he already knows the answer. I rose, crossed the room, and opened the fireproof box. The lid gave that familiar, weighted click. From inside, I pulled a single envelope and placed it on the coffee table in front of him. He stared at it like it might burn. When he finally opened it, the paper inside was not a check, not a deed, not a key. It was a printed photo. The image was clear. Me at the dining table, the angle catching Jade's hand mid-air. My head turned just enough for the bruise to bloom along my cheekbone. The timestamp glowed in the corner. His jaw tightened. On the back, in my handwriting, "This was your moment. You gave it away." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I didn't think—" "Marcus," I said, my voice low but steady. "You don't need to explain. I don't need to hear the excuses you've been crafting since that night. This," I tapped the photo, "is the truth neither of us can rewrite." He folded the photo back into the envelope like it was fragile, but his hands were trembling, and the paper crinkled under his grip. "You think I don't hate myself for it?" His voice cracked. You think I haven't replayed it 1,000 times? That's the difference between us, I said. I don't replay it. I moved past it. You're still there. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling like he was looking for answers in the plaster. What do I do now? He asked finally, his voice small. I looked at him. My son. The boy I'd once carried home asleep in my arms. The man who'd let me walk out of a house with my cheek stinging and my pride bleeding. You live with what you chose, I said. And maybe one day, you use it to stop someone else from doing the same. He nodded slowly, like the weight of the room had settled on his shoulders all at once. Then his eyes darted to the fireproof box still sitting open on the desk. Is that? Yes, I said. That's my will. The one you'll never see again. The one that makes sure what I built goes where it matters. His face crumpled. Tears came fast, heavy, the kind of sobs that shake the body and leave it hollow. He cried harder over the will, I thought, watching the man I had raised unravel in front of me. I had cried years ago. That was the difference.